we were really trying to do is understand the suitability of EVs from a commercial or a business perspective. Does an EV work in every situation? The likelihood is probably not, to be honest. Will it work in the majority? Yes, and we need to know which it will work in and which it won't work in. So we need to understand both the positive and the negative situational aspects to EVs when it comes to the business needs as well. Because if there is a situation out there where EVs are not suitable, that is something we need to share with people so we're avoiding that negative experience when it comes to electric vehicles. Because at the end of the day, we all need to move towards our targets of decarbonising the transport sector, and electrifying the fleet is essentially the low-hanging fruit. So through this trial, we can understand that experience, whether it's the suitability, whether it's the experience of getting drivers in a company into the cars, into the vans, and seeing how they react to that. And we need to understand what is the change in behaviour. There is a massive behavioural aspect when it comes to electric vehicles. Even as simply as looking at purchasing an EV, you need to switch from just looking at the upfront cost to actually looking at the total cost of ownership over the lifespan of those vehicles as well. And what we are looking to do is to generate that real-world data that we can share and showcase to people that shows you can save money, but you can also save CO2 and emissions. You can show off your green credentials to your customers, which since COVID hit us is actually quite a significant bonus to electric vehicles, as well as consumers are now tending towards greener businesses. And we want to be able to highlight, is there any barriers that has come to us and been showcased through this trial? And that will allow us to design activities, design schemes, design incentives that may be able to remove those barriers and make it a more positive landscape for the electrification of fleets. So, as I said, we have had a number of vehicles finish their first trial period, so we are able to garner some initial trends, and some early data indicators. So we collected data from each participating vehicle through a geotab device that we placed in the OBD port of the vehicles as well, which was not a real-time collection, but it actually provided the data after the fact because of GDPR complications that could have been there. So this data is actually evaluated by SEAI to allow us to understand the performance of the vehicles while they're under placement, but also the potential savings and the actual savings that happen throughout each of the placements of the vehicles. So for the data I'm going to share today, we took the first 11 participants who finished their 3-month trial. There were 7 passenger cars and there was 4 vans within those 11. There was a 3-month data set that we evaluated to provide some trends today. Some of the data points we collected were the total distance travelled, the electricity or the energy consumed by the vehicles, the number of charging cycles, the type of charging cycles, etc. So what we are using this data to determine is, well, we all know when you buy a vehicle, you get a stated efficiency, fuel consumption efficiency. That's not real world. So we want to understand what is that real world efficiency and what is the kind of deviation factors from the stated or the tested ones as well. We want to calculate what emissions were avoided by switching into the electric vehicle. And also we want to concentrate on then the fuel cost savings as well. So here's some nice pictorials of some of our data as well. So as you can see, there was over 23,000 kilometres travelled by the 11 vehicles in the 3 months, which is quite a significant distance that was travelled. And when we took the real world efficiency of each of those placements of the vehicles, we found that there was a combined real world, and I just want to emphasize that real world, a fuel consumption efficiency of 26 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres. So for every 100 kilometres travelled by a vehicle, it was taking 26 kilowatt hours of electricity. So we also recorded 260 charging sessions, which is a very interesting figure, because if you look, there was 23,000 kilometres, even more than 23,000 kilometres travelled, but there was actually only 260 charging cycles in operation to cover that distance. So that whole kind of myth about I'd have to charge 2, 3, 4 times a day, 6, 7, 8 times a week is actually not there, because as you can see, it was 260 charging cycles over a 3-month period for 11 vehicles for 23,000 kilometres. We did record that only 5% of the charging cycles were actually fast charging, which what we would call is your 50 kilowatt DC and above. As you can see there, there's actually 37 DC fast charging sessions, but what happened was one participant in particular was very dependent on that fast DC charging. So when we excluded them, there was 5% of the charging cycles were actually DC fast charging. All the other charging occurred either at the premises through the charge point we provided or at the public kind of on-street AC charge points as well. So there was a combined fuel saving of €361 for the 3 months. Now you might think that is quite low, but there's a lot of different aspects to that I'm going to talk to now as to why some people had a higher saving than others as well, but we'll come on to that now in a moment. And we have calculated then from the actual real world data we've collected that there was a potential for up to €250 savings in fuel costs for every 10,000 kilometres travelled. Now, particularly in the commercial sense, you could say 30, 40, 50,000 kilometres is probably a standard enough journey. So you could be looking at a significant amount of money each year you could save. So then just some other takeaways and trends that we have for you is it does offer a significant opportunity to reduce your CO2 emissions. Because at the end of the day, a fully electric vehicle does not have a tailpipe, so there's no tailpipe emissions from the use of that vehicle. Now, there is CO2 associated with, with the actual generation of the electricity to fuel that vehicle as well, so that needs to be factored in to some degree as well. It does, as I mentioned, enhance your business green credentials, which can be an important factor when consumers are deciding whether to use your business for their needs. We have showcased through even just the first 11 vehicles the suitability for the numerous industries and business settings that could be out there. Like we have a high level of kilometres travelled with over 23,000 in the 3 months. We had a distillery, a distribution company, utility company, public body, waste management, property services, finance company, a veterinarian, food company, technology services, and marine research in there. So you can see it's a very diverse businesses that we have taken part in this scheme, which is fantastic to give us that real world experience we can share across all these different industries. And geographically, we had a big spread as well with our vehicles. Our first 11 is all placed in Longford, Donegal, Dublin, Galway, Limerick, Sligo, Wexford, and Roscommon. So an interesting note as well is this is actually a winter performance of the vehicle. So you often hear EVs perform worse in cold weather. So we are actually going to be able to track the seasonal effect of that performance on the vehicles, because it's the same vehicles we're putting out there in each of the 4 trials, which will roughly equate to each of the 4 seasons that we have. Now, the other items that might affect that is the different business needs that they're fulfilling and the driving styles as well. So it does provide a financial saving opportunity. As I've shown, there is fuel cost savings there. And again, just remember, it's a very small period, 3 months, and it does depend on a number of different aspects as well. So we did note there was varied savings, but the majority of the participants were at the higher end of the savings that we noted as well. So the items that are actually affecting the potential for financial savings when it comes to fuel costs, and just emphasize fuel cost savings is the only thing I'm speaking to today with regard to the financial aspects. So the driving style of the actual driver of the vehicle is an important one. Eco-driving is a term that's used quite a lot, but it's not implemented enough. If you implement the actual principles of eco-driving, regardless of what the fuel type is, you will improve the performance of that vehicle. And for an electric vehicle, you can actually make them more efficient, and you can extend the range that they're able to travel to one charge as well. So we do have on our Energy Academy for SEAI, we do have an eco-driving module that would be very good for anyone who wants to find out how to eco-drive and get started along that journey. And as we see, there was a fine distance travelled, but the more that was distance that you do travel, the more you're going to save. Now that seems like a strange, counterintuitive point for me to make, given that we are shifting towards the whole avoid, shift, improve mantra to transport. But in a commercial setting, there are needs that have to be met, there are distances that have to be travelled, so the more you actually travel, the more you're actually going to save. Then there was some, just to note as well, that fast charging will regularly increase the price. Given the recent prices that we've seen increase for the use of the public charging network, particularly the fast and rapid charging, that will add to the cost of running your vehicle as well. So what we would recommend to do is you try and do the majority of your charging either at your home or at your business premises, where you have your own charge point that's specifically for yourself, and you can actually avail of night rate electricity whether you're in the home or you're in a commercial building as well. So that's all from me now. So I'm going to pass you on to Sean, who is a participant within this trial, and he's going to speak to his own experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you very much. Is this my one open up here already, Shane, is it? Is this my presentation open already, is it? Oh, good man. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for coming along. I'm going to speak to you about what is a very important subject, that of the psychology of EV driving. Now, before I start, can I ask, are you all fleet managers, or are there any psychologists in the audience? How about you, sir? You look a little bit like a psychologist. Or any amateur psychologists even. Or would anybody like to come up on stage and speak about your feelings? No, the reason I'm going to talk about psychology is, if you are fleet managers and you are tasked by your CEO with rolling out EVs across your drivers, you will find that the psychology of EV driving will be your biggest barrier. People, by nature, we are all creatures of habit. If you have been tasked by your CEO to give out cars in the past, you go and you speak to LeasePlan or ALD or whoever, you order 100 Skoda Superbs, they're delivered, everybody knows what they're going to be like, how they're going to drive them and use them. You're not going to have any real pushback from your drivers. If, however, you say, right, I've been told to give everybody an EV, some people will go, oh, cool, I like the sound of that. But many others will say, oh, hang on now. Now I'm going to have to start thinking about my transport. Before, they left their home in the morning thinking about the meeting they were going to. They stuck the key in the car, half asleep, turned the key out the gate. Even if it was low on fuel, it didn't matter. You saw a petrol station in no time, you pulled in, you filled back up. There was no thought went in, thank you very much. There was no thought went into actually getting to your destination. Now that has to change a little bit with EVs, let's be honest. So look, it's all in the mind. The technology is there. Thanks to Shane and his team, I've been using one of these EVs for the last 3 months for work. I was quite terrified in the beginning, quite frankly, but it has been absolutely excellent. We had zero problems whatsoever. We would have been one of the higher users in kilometres on a VW ID4, and it worked out absolutely perfectly. But it was in the mind in the beginning. I was aware that the technology was adequate. I had read 400 kilometre range. I had looked at the app and seen that there were chargers all around the country. But it's another story when you have to go out and do it. Our minds hadn't really got there yet. We are, as I said, creatures of habit. We're naturally afraid we will be inconvenienced. It's your drivers, if your fleet manager will go, but look, I could be held up, I could be delayed, I could be late coming home, I could be late for a meeting. It's understandable. They'll say to you, I'll have to visit the mother-in-law in Kerry. How are we going to do that? We take our car on holidays every year. We go to France or we go to somewhere, Connemara. How's that going to work out? And of course, they'll throw this one at you all the time. But look at electricity, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up every day. And the old chestnut always, but what if there's a power cut? Well, if there's a power cut, the petrol pumps don't work either. But it'll be thrown at you if you're the fleet manager. So you'll need to consider these. These are rational and reasonable feelings that these people will have. Now, what influences these people's attitudes? And these are normal people. This was me 4 months ago. We are creatures of habit, as I said. There are abundant fuel stations, so we never have to think. You stick the key in the car and you go. And it's that go anywhere freedom. We've all grown to like it. We've all grown very, very used to it. We live in reasonably affluent times. There are a number of cars in each home. We all have enough money to put fuel in them, thanks be to God. We can go where we like, really. We're afraid we might have to give that up. We're afraid if there was a detour. Your first reaction if your fleet manager says, electric car for you next year, is, oh my God, I'm coming home if there's roadworks and I'm sent 20 miles out of my way, what will happen? And this is an interesting one. This is into the psychology as well. Depending on the sector you're in, is it cool to turn up at your client's premises in an EV? If you're in I'm in media, it was pretty cool. Yeah, I was quite happy turning up in places in a nice, cool, shiny new EV. If I were a representative in the agricultural sector, for example, working for Glanbia or somebody, it might be less cool to drive into a farmyard with one. It'll be an interesting development in people's minds, but it's there in people's heads at the moment. Now, you might ask yourself, if you're the fleet manager, you're getting frustrated. Your CEO is putting pressure on you, implement this. Your drivers are pushing back. You'll say, is it justified? Well, I will say yes and no. Yes, because, people are human and their feelings are their feelings. No, because as Shane said, EVs suit the majority of applications already. Now, it's correct, as Shane said, to say they suit most, but not all applications. But it's also, it's like the most means most. EVs have been around now for a long time. Like 10 years ago, they didn't. Your first Nissan Leafs with their 24 kilowatt hour batteries weren't really suitable for commercial travel and so on. But your current range of cars with your 77 kilowatt hour batteries, they're suitable for Ireland and they're suitable for working. You will leave your home every day with 400 kilometres of range in your car. And I will say this to you, it will be a rare day that anybody will do over 400 kilometres. And on the days you do, there's plenty charging available. I found it out myself. I will say to you, I had the ID4 from Shane for a whole month before I ventured further than 400 kilometres. And here's the psychology of it. On the first day that I was going on a very long journey and I knew I would need to charge, I purposely said to my family, don't expect to be home until tomorrow. The naivety of thinking that I could have to spend the night in a hotel. Of course I didn't, but that's where we're at in our minds, I think, and that's where your drivers, if you're fleet managers, that's where your drivers are at. Now, this is really important. If you're a fleet manager, I would strongly urge you to look at the individual circumstances of each driver that you intend to give an EV to. As I said in the past, you ordered 100 new Skoda Superbs or VW Passats or whatever, and everybody got one. I would not recommend you take that approach as a fleet manager now. The individual circumstances are very, very important, because what you don't want to do is roll out these cars and the whole thing to end up a mess. Fellas going to their manager saying, I can't work anymore. That fleet manager has given me a car that's not fit for purpose. Or you don't want the work not getting done. So, for example, Shane mentioned home charging. Home charging is where it's at. In my experience for the 3 months, home charging was nearly 90% of the 6,500 kilometres that I did. So if your drivers cannot have a home charge, if there's a few who live in apartments or whatever, I mean, I would hold back for now. There's no point in rolling these out and failing. If you've got 50 or 100 drivers in your fleet and 5 of them cannot have a home charger, there's no point in giving them an EV. You're giving them, you're tying one hand behind their back. It's a terrible disadvantage. So look at the individual circumstances. Will they have many overnights away from home? That one is important. If they're staying in premium hotels, probably they'll be able to charge. If they're in more rural areas, maybe staying in B&Bs or whatever, you could really challenge them by putting them into an EV at this stage. So I would say to you, look at the individual circumstances of every driver, the weight they carry. I know Volvo Trucks are here, they'll touch on that with far more experience and skill than I can, but weight is actually very important. There are a number of things: speed, weight and heat. Those 3 things are very important. I'll touch on them. And I would also say to you, start with your tech-savvy drivers. It doesn't take much tech-savvy to pull a diesel pump out of its holder and stick it in the car and go in and pay for it. But it does take a little bit more to run the charging of a car. Now, you don't have to be Einstein, but you do have to download apps. You have to find chargers. You sometimes have to use the app to charge. Okay, you can mitigate that, make it easier by using cards. DCI have cards that you can just use with chargers as you would in a diesel pump. ESB have cards. But you'll make your job easier as a fleet manager by starting with the tech-savvy employees. If you can roll out the first batch of EVs in your fleet to tech-savvy people who have home chargers, you're going to make that first phase far more likely to be successful. And if the first phase is successful, the second phase gets easier and down along. And again, try and start with drivers who want EVs. Your CEO is probably telling you now, get the EVs implemented across the fleet, but you can't do it all in the one day, or the 1 week, or the one season, the one quarter, the 1 year possibly. So start with those who are quite open to them and quite well disposed toward them. Try not to force them on people. There'll be time. If a first phase is successful and the second phase is successful, those later adapters will just take them. The people who didn't want to do their banking online, but now do it online. They'll maybe be the last ones in your company to accept the EV, but they will. And I would say this to you, always spend your money on the long-range battery. If you're choosing, will I get the bigger car? Will I get the nicer leather seats? Will I get the bigger wheels? Whatever, specify the bigger battery, because the bigger battery will take away the range anxiety. So when we think back when we were buying diesel or petrol cars, we looked at the engine size and the power output. Well, when you're specifying electric cars for your fleets, the really important thing to specify is the larger number of kilowatt hours of electricity that the battery can store. So nowadays, there's a wide range of cars available with 77 kilowatt hour batteries. If you can stretch there, do. Okay, there are a number of other issues like efficiency, how well they use that storage and so on. But look, as a rule of thumb, if they're going out the gate in the morning with more electricity on board, they're going to go further. Right? I found that we were able to achieve an efficiency of approximately 20 kilowatt hours of electricity for every 100 kilometers. So if you've got a 77 kilowatt hour battery in the car, well, 77 is almost 4 times 20. So 20 kilowatt hours will get you 100 kilometers, 4 times that will get you 400 kilometers. Okay? So spend your money on the battery. And here's a trick. Maybe if you're trying to implement EVs into your fleet, offer higher spec EVs than you would ICE cars, ICE, internal combustion engine cars. So that might be just a little trick to sort of incentivize people into them. This is very important as well. Provide proper training. It only takes a half an hour, but the dealers are, with respect, if there are any dealers present, they're not doing it, and they're not doing it very well. On delivery of an EV, either the dealers don't really know too much about it, or they're a little reluctant to imply in any way that this might be inconvenient. But I would say to you, devise a little course. Shane mentioned a good eco-driving course they have on the SEAI. Devise a course that explains to people how best to charge these. Like simply, for example, really to maintain the life of your battery, you should charge it to 80% every night. Not 100% unless you need it. It's very, very easy to set the maximum charge in the car to 80%. So you plug it in and it will get to 80% and it will stop. The battery will last longer if you're not running it up to 100% every single night. So in my experience, what I did was I always had it set for 80%. And if I knew the next day was going to be a very long trip, I would change it to 100%. But most of the charging was up to 80%. Sometimes your drivers will say to you, but the batteries can fail in these things. They won't fail if you generally run them between 20% and 80%. So if you start off leaving the house in the morning with 80%, and you don't tend to let it go below 20%, they will run for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kilometers. How you kind of wear them out a bit is running them up to 100% all the time and running them right down to 3 and 4%. It's not good business anyway to run them down below 20. I would say this to you as well. If your CEO has come to you and said, get EVs across the fleet, well, make sure he's the first in an EV and try and get all the directors into them. Set by example. It looks good. Maybe provide preferential parking. It's another incentive for your employees. And this is interesting. I mentioned speed earlier on. There is an enormous difference in the consumption of any fuel to get a car to go over 100 kilometers an hour. And it's down to aerodynamics. If you look at the curve of aerodynamic resistance, what it takes to push, and Volvo trucks know all about this, what it takes to push any object through the air, between 100 and 120 kilometers per hour, there is a very significant upturn in the amount of energy it takes to push through. So there is a huge advantage in driving at 100 on the motorway compared to 120. Now that advantage applies equally in petrol or diesel cars, but of course we don't tend to care, do we? So I would say to people, as a fleet manager, start pushing that one a little bit. If you could get your diesel guys to be motivated to slow down toward the 100 kilometers per hour, they will resist less when they take over an EV. Because if I'm going to Cork and back, I will always set my cruise control in an EV at 100 kilometers an hour because it vastly extends my range. I've heard the minister talking about possibly reducing the speed limit on the motorway to 100 kilometers per hour. So I've come across EV drivers who say, I don't want the EV because I want to belt down to Cork at 130 kilometers an hour, and I might lose too much range if I did that. But I would say to you, start encouraging your diesel guys to slow down as well. Then they won't be faced with the same disadvantage. And heat is another one. Heat is kind of important. And again, you'll get this one. Some people love a really toasty car. If you had to sit in a car with my wife, you had to take off your shoes and socks before you get in. Heat is a big one. Heat is a waste byproduct of a petrol or diesel engine. There's all you want of it available to you. Just turn it to flow into the car instead of out into the atmosphere. That is not the case with an electric car. If you want to heat a cabin, you have to use electricity in the equivalent way of a 2-bar heater. So it's not very prudent to heat up the whole big space that is the cabin of an EV. So again, if you've got drivers looking to extend their range, encourage them to use the heated steering wheel, which many, many EVs have, and the heated seats, and to keep the cabin a little bit cooler. Makes a huge difference. You'll be surprised how much further they will go if you don't turn the whole cabin up to 24 degrees, 25 degrees. I would have typically over the winter now run the cabin at maybe 18 or 19 degrees with the heated steering wheel and the heated seat on. And it's a very good idea. They have to think a little. I said that earlier. We don't have to think when we drive petrol or diesel. It's a fact. You do have to think a little bit. Shane, I think you'll agree. You have to think a little bit, even with the trucks. It's not just sit in half asleep and turn the key anymore. You have to think. You have to remember to plug it in every night. Now, it takes a minute when you get home. Plug it in. But you have to remember to do it every night. You don't want to come out in the morning and find it's not charged. But it's a 2-second job when you come in. You have to plan a little bit. Like I would have driven a number of times now from Wexford across to Clare. We did some work over on the Cliffs of Moher. We did a lot of work in Donegal. And in my head I said, right, I'm going to boot from Wexford to Sligo, and while I'm having something to eat, I'll give it a 30-minute charge in Sligo. And that'll take me to Donegal, all around Donegal, and back to Sligo. Another 30-minute charge tomorrow, and then back home. So it's little thinking, but it's a little more thinking than with a petrol station, which you're going to come across just on the road anyway. I mentioned Donegal. What we did in Donegal, and this could be interesting if you're putting drivers into EVs. We were very thankful to the SEAI for the use of a fine car for the 3 months. We developed an EV driving adventure, something that people can do in their own time. It doesn't cost any money. They go to Killybegs and they find their way to Kilmarkey. They could do it with their families, they do it with their friends, they do it alone, but it's kind of fun. And once you've done it, or some people in your company have done it, you've proven EVs can go anywhere. Killybegs is on the far end of nowhere, up in Donegal, up in the northwest. Kilmarkey, where I live, is on the far end of nowhere, down in the southeast. They're 2 fishing villages in the far ends of the country, and EVs are perfectly suitable for that. There is more than adequate charging on the way. So the website is www.killybegs to Kilmarkey. But if you are bringing EVs into your company, send somebody on that trip and get them to post to the company's social media. You'll be surprised how people are kind of go, oh yeah, okay. If you can do that, you can do anything. And if anybody's complaining to you, ask them, well, are you going to go from Killybegs to Kilmarkey in your daily work every day? And if they say, well, they're not, well, say, well, look, these cars are more than capable of doing that. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your attention. Thank you, Shane.
Good day to everyone. My name is Cathal Clark. I'm energy analyst with the energy statistics team at SEAI. Firstly, I'd just like to plug SEAI statistics team first of all. So the team sits within SEAI, and our job is to collect energy supply, consumption and transformation data from other programs within SEAI, energy supply companies, network operators, electricity generators, large energy users. We take this data, and we also take some data from CSO and the EPA, and we produce some publications. Some of you might be familiar with, perhaps, I hope, the Energy Balance and Energy in Ireland report. We also produce price data and other miscellaneous data publications. Primarily, as it's important for us today, as we're talking about transport emissions, is that the energy balance feeds into the EPA's National Inventory of Emissions, which basically calculates how Ireland's doing in terms of emissions across all the sectors of the economy on an annual basis. We disseminate information to our parent department, the public in general, and other state agencies, and we fulfil Ireland's reporting requirements to Eurostat and the International Energy Agency. So first of all, I'm just going to go over a brief overview of transport and in terms of its emissions and the key drivers of energy policy in Ireland at the moment. So the first, I think the headline figures is that, to put it in context, is that transport consists of 31% of Ireland's energy-related emissions, which is about 18% of total emissions. It may not sound like a lot, but it is actually quite significant. And if we can't decarbonise transport, well then there's not much hope for any of the other sectors, because after electricity, it's probably the easiest one. It falls under the carbon budget, obviously, and it has a sectoral emission ceiling. We'll get onto those later. And there are various measures and targets in the Climate Action Plan, most recently CAP 23, which was published just around the turn of the new year. All right. It's also, transport in Ireland, and particularly renewable transport, is strongly influenced by the EU's Renewable Energy Directive, which is now in its second iteration, RED II. It's the shorthand RED II is used. RED II specifies a 34.1 renewable energy share by 2030. So that's for the entire all energy consumption in Ireland. Needs to be 34.1% renewable by 2030. It also specifies a specific target for transport, so that's 14% renewable energy share in transport by 2030, and that's referred to as the Res T target, so I might use that again later. And there are various sub-targets and limits on different fuel types, some of which we'll touch on our way through. Should also be noted that RED III, so the third iteration of the directive, is to be finalised soon at a European level, which will likely increase those targets, so make it more onerous to reach our 2030 targets, but we'll touch on that again later. So I'd like to start by showing, this is just a trend of Ireland's transport emissions. Never mind the colours for a moment, but if you just look at the height of the bars, how much CO2 was produced in transport each year for the last 20 years. 2022 is provisional at the moment. We don't have a breakdown amongst the different transport subsectors. But we can see that, I'd like to point out that the emissions have pretty much risen every year, with the exception of the economic downturn and the pandemic. Now, it did flatten out slightly in 2016, 2017, but that was actually because our energy consumption has pretty much increased in all the years outside the economic downturn and the pandemic, our energy consumption in transport, that is. But in 2016 going on to 2017, there was a significant increase in the amount of biofuel that was put on the market, so that actually sort of flattened out our emissions. But I think this is always stark to look at, that despite work being done on EVs and work being done on biofuels and in other shifting and avoiding measures, that we still haven't really tackled transport. And if you put a horizontal line across here, we can see the emissions in 2022 pretty much the same as they were in 2010 and in 2002. So, hopefully we're not back here in 10 years, 12 years, and it's the same again. It's also worth noting that 2018 is the baseline for carbon budget. So the reductions referred to in CAP 23, in the Climate Action Plan, and in the sectoral emission ceilings refer to this baseline year. So just to further show the breakdown of transport emissions, this is from 2021, so it's the latest year for which we have complete data. Private car use is almost 50%. It's 48% here. Then followed by HGVs, LGVs, and so on. We have about approximately 9% as unspecified road consumption or road emissions. That's just a statistical difference. I mean, effectively that can be apportioned out amongst private car HGVs and LGVs. So private cars are approximately 50% or more than 50%, and HGVs are approximately a quarter. Road emissions account for 95% of transport emissions, which is fairly unsurprising. I'll get onto aviation in a second. The other category at the top includes navigation, other than international maritime navigation, domestic aviation, which is very small, and pipeline emissions associated with pipeline transport of natural gas. These emissions exclude international aviation. International aviation is excluded from the sectoral emission ceilings and the carbon budget. They're included in a different mechanism, which is the EU emission trading scheme. So here I'll just show a quick breakdown of the fuels that are used in road transport, specifically road transport in 2021. You can see it's dominated by diesel. There's been an ongoing shift away from petrol, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, and even following on from COVID, we can still see that trajectory, that petrol seems to be more affected in the long term. Maybe it's fewer people, petrol is predominantly used in passenger cars, fewer people driving to work, I don't know. But you can see that the shift has continued away from petrol. The breakdown is dominated by diesel, and there's about 5% by energy of liquid biofuels. There's also a small amount of electricity in there. This is 2021. I'd expect that to be significantly higher in 2022, as we'll get onto the numbers of EVs in a few minutes. But the number of EVs is growing quite significantly. And then we have natural gas, which is all consumed as compressed natural gas, and LPG making up a 0.1%. I'd like to just refer quickly to the sectoral emission ceilings and how Ireland's transport emissions fit in with that and how we're doing at the moment. So as you can see, the yellow bars here sort of show the guideline emissions for transport for the first budget period. There's one budget period going from 2021 to 2025, and then a second budget period to 26 to 2030. The budget amount for the first period is 54 megatons CO2 equivalent, and it's 37 megatons of CO2 equivalent for the second. There is no strict limit on which years you use the budget in, but you have to stay under the budget for the budget period. So we can see the first grey bar is for 2021, so that's our definitive emissions that year in transport. You can see it's affected by COVID, so we had a slight saving, if you want to phrase it that way. So consequently, and this year we've slightly exceeded what would have been the guideline amount for 2022. So we're within the sectoral emission ceiling because of the pandemic, and the only thing is we're sort of trending in the wrong direction. But we will require around a 3.5% reduction every year till 2025 inclusive, and then slightly more than that in the second budget period. 3.5% reduction in emissions is more or less a 3.5% reduction in transport use. So it's like 3.5% fewer car journeys, fewer truck journeys, etc. Let's get on now to move on to solutions. In other words, how it's proposed, or one of the ways in which it will be possible to meet the sectoral emission ceilings. Here, look at what Climate Action Plan 23 has in it. Has modelled, there was some modelling work done by the NTA, National Transport Authority, on the emissions between the baseline and 2025 and between the baseline and 2030. And this shows how the emissions will be built up, or how the emission savings will be built up. So the yellow dot is the emission savings. I'm not sure if you can see the yellow dot, the contrast is probably a bit off. But to 2025, we need to save 2.44 megatons CO2 and around 6 megatons to 2030. As you can see, the red bars indicate the demographic growth. So in other words, there's going to be, as population increases, economy grows, there will be demographic pressure that has to be offset. So even just to stay as we are, we have to, in other words, to keep emissions as they are, we would have to make some adjustments. To go beyond that and make the savings, we've identified, or CAP identifies, the sustainable transport and behavioural changes. So these are structural changes that we kind of won't deal with here at the moment. We'll have a look at the electrification and vehicle technology, as obviously is the subject today, and also biofuels. So we can see there's a saving. The heavy lifting, I suppose, is being done here by the electrification, particularly in the second half of the decade. Here we have, it's the same as the previous graph, which showed all of transport savings. This is basically broken out by the modes or the subsectors of transport, whatever way you want to call it. So in the first 5 years of the decade, most of the savings are going to be carried by private cars. You can see huge amount by electrification, small amount by behavioural changes and biofuels. HGVs are actually, in this modelling, it showed that HGVs would not contribute to saving. In fact, emissions would increase from HGVs. LGVs, slight saving, likewise public transport and the other modes. Then if we have a look at the second part, so this is the decade combined here on the right-hand side. So we can see, again, private cars doing most of the work, small saving from HGVs and the other sectors. Again, it's mostly from electrification, some biofuel, and a significant bit of behavioural and sustainable transport changes. Okay, so here, just as electrification is so clearly earmarked in CAP as being, the measure by which we're going to decarbonise, I thought we'd have a look at the total EVs. Now, as I've been reliably informed by Shane, this figure is probably not correct because I've taken the data from CSO, and Department of Transport data might differ slightly. It depends, and we don't have Department of Transport data for 2022 yet. So we're showing 41,000 EVs. That's just BEVs, no hybrids in that, as pure electric vehicles. So that's private cars, almost entirely private cars, some goods vehicles and other vehicles, which would be buses and motorcycles, I would imagine. To put that in context with what's in the Climate Action Plan as the target. So we've changed the scales completely here from 45,000 on the left-hand side. We're now at 1 million on the left-hand side. So where we are now is 2022. We have significant growth to do to 2025, and then an even more accelerated growth to the 2030 targets. The 2030 targets are not necessarily all EVs. It depends on how you read the CAP 23, but most of them are pure EVs. So we've about 195,000 EVs registered in 2025 and about 950,000 in 2030. So it's a significant increase, but you know there has been a significant increase in the last couple of years, and if this trend was to continue, not quite exponential growth, but I mean, if that continued, then it is possible. So now I'd just like to look at where the renewable energy in transport comes from at the moment and where it's come from in the last 15 years. This graph here shows, the yellow line shows the percentage of renewable energy in transport. You can see at the moment, if you look at the scale on the right-hand side, we're up at around 5%, having grown from effectively zero in 2006. As you can see, most of the increase has been biodiesel. There's some biogasoline, which is bioethanol, in there as well. And in the last few years, you can see a small amount of renewable electricity. It's about, which is about 36% in 2021. So 36% of electricity used was renewable. You can see that the increase in renewable energy has been kind of jagged. It hasn't been a smooth curve. That's primarily because biofuel consumption is driven by a biofuel obligation that's set by the government. So as the biofuel obligation rate has changed and increased, each time it's increased, there's been a little jump in biofuel consumption, and then it would stay steady until the next jump again. So that's why we kind of have this jagged growth. Just to show in detail what the different types of renewable energy in transport are, we have biodiesel, two types of biodiesel, what's called ME or methyl ester, which is the standard type of biodiesel, which is limited in how much you can blend into standard fossil diesel. You can only blend it to about 7% by volume. Sorry, you can only blend it up to 7% by volume. And in fact, most of the time the average blend rate is below that. Biodiesel, HVO, is slightly newer on the market, and it's currently at around 4% of renewables. This is a like-for-like replacement for diesel, so it can be blended past 7% by volume, which makes it more valuable. It's also more expensive to produce. Bioethanol is at 11% there. It's typically blended at around 5% by volume into petrol at the pump that you get at the pump. We also have some bio-LPG that's consumed in vehicles, and some very small amount of bio-CNG as well, along with the renewable electricity and in road and also in rail. The rail electricity I've included here because it's included in our calculations towards our targets, but it's relatively small. So biodiesel accounts for 85%, and the biofuels combined are over 98% of renewable energy in transport. So at the moment, biofuels are doing most of the work. Electricity will come down the road, and just say, yeah. So the electricity, if you think about electricity from road, it overtook rail for the first time in 2021. So it overtook the Dart and Lewis. So that's the kind of scale we're thinking of. But of course, it's probably going to double 2020 for the 2022 figures. As I said, a further increase in the electricity expected. So just to show where does our biofuel come from, we're heavily reliant on UCO, which is used cooking oil, and tallow, waste tallow. We also use a small amount of food and feed crops, corn, and oil crops, etc. We also use some other byproducts from the food industry, and we have very small amount of advanced feedstocks on the market, which are subject to an EU target as well. So that's something we need to increase as well. So it's 87% reliant on used cooking oil and tallow, and our biofuel feedstocks are about 60% imported, 40% indigenous. So this bit here is just, the first part here is to show the renewable energy shares in the fuel types or energy types at the moment. So if you go to the pump and you manage to find a pump that has the average bioethanol composition and put it into your car, you'll be getting about 3.3% bioethanol by energy, and the rest will be fossil petrol. This is for 2021. It's probably the same for 2022 because they're at the E5 blend wall. So you might have heard of petrol referred to as E5. That means that it's 5% bioethanol by volume. But obviously when you correct for physical properties, the actual energy content is less than that, so that's why it's 3.3% here. Also, suppliers are relatively free to blend as they like, so long as they keep it within specification and that they meet their obligation at the end of the year. So if you go out to a pump and it says E5 on it, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's 5% by volume of bioethanol in it. Likewise with diesel, the current standard is B7, which means 7% biodiesel, which is methyl ester. But if you work it out by energy, it's about 5.5% by energy. This again is because of physical properties, but also because blending up to 7% all year round can lead to issues with cold flow properties. Fatty acid methyl esters, they don't flow well in cold weather, so that's why it's blended slightly below 7%. And then electricity, so if you were to charge your vehicle in 2021, you'd be getting about 36% renewable electricity. So straight away you can see the comparison there. And as I see, that's not even comparing like with like. There's another trick up the electricity sleeve now in a minute as well. So for petrol, they have cap, I put in the wrong caption here, but this is the 2030 target from CAP 23. So this one shows that there's the plans to increase petrol to E10, which would be about 7% bioethanol by energy, and increase diesel to B20, which would be so it would mean that diesel in 2030, diesel at the pump will be about 19% renewable. Electricity, the ambitious target in CAP 23 says up to 80% renewable by 2030. So if you were to charge your EV in 2030, you'd be getting 80% renewable electricity. Whether it is 80% or not, it's certainly going to be more than what petrol and diesel are offering in terms of renewable share. The other thing to note is that the electric drivetrain efficiency. So like you're talking about an ballpark figure that's used sort of on national statistics level is like you're going 2.5 times further on an EV than you are. So you're going 2.5 times further in an EV than in an ICE for the same amount of energy. So on top of the higher renewable share, you've got the higher drivetrain efficiency. So I'd like to move on to the Renewable Energy Directive, and I hopefully won't get bogged down too long on this. The idea of the Renewable Energy Directives They began in 2009, and they set national targets for the overall renewable energy share, called overall RES sometimes, and renewable energy share in transport. Both of these targets were set for 2020 and another one for 2030. There are some interim targets as well. It sets out the sustainability requirements for biofuels and biomass. So effectively, you can't just, sell any fuel on the market, call it biofuel, and then claim credit for it. You have to prove that it's sustainable. The Renewable Energy Directive sets out how you do that. It also sets out the accounting rules for how Ireland is to meet the targets and the various sub-targets and limits within. Sorry about this, I dragged the slide to the wrong location in the presentation. But as a question that we've got frequently from companies is they perhaps purchase biofuel not at the pump, but they buy it directly from a biofuel supplier or any fuel supplier, and it's maybe HVO or it's 100% HVO, something like that. And they want to know, well, how do I make sure that it's sustainable, or how do I make sure that it hasn't been counted already somewhere else? So in other words, how do I know that the company didn't already sell the certificates for it in another jurisdiction, get credit for it there, and now are trying to sell it to me again? Well, there is the biofuel, what was called the Biofuel Obligation Scheme in Ireland. It's now called the Renewable Transport Fuel Obligation Scheme. It's the mechanism by which Ireland promotes renewable energy and transport. It's operated by the National Oil Reserves Agency, NORA. It puts a legal obligation on companies that place road transport fuel on the market. So that's fossil transport fuel. They must meet a renewable transport fuel obligation rate. The rate at the moment is 14.5% by energy. It goes up not every year, but typically every year or two. The sustainable biofuels are awarded certs under the scheme, and then the certs are used to offset the obligation. So if you're looking to know how do you know that the biofuel is sustainable, well, ask your supplier to give you evidence of a biofuel or RTFO cert awarded by NORA. So jumping back a bit here, sorry, the Renewable Energy Directive, the first one was dealing with 2020. Had a RES-T, so a renewable energy and transport target of 10% by 2020, and it has a multiplier in there, effectively meant we could count UCO and tallow twice. It's a strange mechanism, but there you go. So the contrast there is probably, I don't know. Yeah, so in January 2021, we moved to RED 2, the second directive. There's a misprint here. It should be the overall RES target of 34.1 by 2030, not 2020, and the RES-T of 14% by 2020. Again, it included this multiplier for UCO and tallow, so kind of promoting the use of UCO and tallow, one of the reasons why Ireland relies on it so heavily. But at the same time, there was a last-minute inclusion of a 1.7% limit on counting UCO and tallow towards RES-T. It also set a target of advanced biofuels, 3.5% by 2030. So these are in very limited use in Ireland. They are generally waste or residue feedstocks that are harder to turn into biofuels, more energy intensive, more costly, but potentially more benefit because they have a bigger life cycle greenhouse gas saving associated with them. There's sort of a technology barrier there that the EU wants to push people to get beyond. So here's what Ireland's renewable energy in transport share looks like at the moment. The green bars were under the first Renewable Energy Directive. We met our 2020 target of 10%. Then the rules changed, and a fairly large chunk of UCO and tallow biofuel was no longer counted towards the RES-T target. Still counted towards the overall renewable energy target, the sort of economy-wide target, but not the transport target. So it left Ireland's Res T at 4.3%, and with a target of 14% in 2030, so a long way off. There is a mechanism for Ireland to look for a derogation from this 1.7% limit on UCO and tallow. I know the Department of Transport were looking into it, but as yet there's no word on that. So it may be a case that there will be a significant shift in the biofuel market here. So following RED 2, there is a proposed RED 3. So this is sort of on the back of the Fit for 55 policy framework, and also was then amended following Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. So it's kind of it's built in both the climate aspect, but also security of supply aspect as well into it. But it's undergoing final kind of negotiations at the moment, I think. So it will increase the overall res to 50%, which is very large considering we're now at about 14%. So it'll be a 50% res by 2030. The Res T is going to be replaced by a 13% reduction in greenhouse gas intensity of transport energy, which makes sense. It promotes less greenhouse gas intensive fuels, so the more greenhouse gas fuel saves, the better. But it will significantly increase the energy share of renewables, or will require a significant increase in the energy share of renewables. The multipliers are removed, so this counting UCO and tallow twice has been removed. There's also a target for 2.6% of what are called renewable fuels of non-biological origin. So basically that means hydrogen from renewable sources and synthetic fuels from renewables, where the energy input is renewable. So 2.6% is quite ambitious. It also pares down the advanced biofuels target slightly to 2.2, I assume, to compensate for that. But for instance, we do not, so in the CAP 23, there's no renewable fuels of biological origin mentioned in it. Or did not? Yeah. So this is actually the last slide here. So basically we're just gonna show, this is the alternative fuels and when we will see significant use in transport, or when we are likely to see it. Currently we have biodiesel, bioethanol, HVO, and then electricity, which is effectively the grid mix of renewables in it. We're likely to move towards electricity where it can be sold directly as renewable before 2030. Also sustainable aviation fuels. I haven't seen the data yet, but I hear that, and you've possibly read in the newspapers that like Ryanair have done a deal to get a supply of sustainable aviation fuel. So it's similar to HVO, but for replace jet kerosene. Also we'll see some advanced biofuels to meet that EU target. We'll also see some bio-CNG and bio-LPG, but again, there's competition with heating, as some of that will probably be pulled into heating. And then HVO, anecdotally, I'm aware that some people are operating HVO, like fleets of vehicles on HVO, 100% HVO, rather than a blend like you would have at the pump. And then finally, what fuels will be at 2030 and beyond? That's really the RFNBO, the renewable fuel of a non-biological origin. So renewable hydrogen and then synthetic e-fuels. They're not in CAP at the moment, so that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bearing with us, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate Shane inviting us along here. I just want to share with you a little bit of a presentation and a couple of films on where we are with our journey on electrification, and going forward where we are getting greenhouse gases down. So all being well, this works. Excellent. Well, that normally would blow your ears out, so there's a little delay on the sound there. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I just want to talk to you a little bit about where our strategy is from Volvo Trucks. Just want to walk through some of the key dates, and again, some of the previous speakers have already touched on some of these key dates. 2025, 2030. I want to take you a little bit beyond that as well, where we have our vision and some of the challenges we have there. Where we see some of the benefits of electrification, our business, our vision. And again, you know, we've talked about, we can probably see as you go around today, you'll see some products already in the light commercials and light and passenger cars, where we are at the moment with our heavy duty goods vehicles, etc., our lineups, some of the benefits to you as operators, and of course where that energy comes from, how to manage that energy, both in the batteries, the range, and the charging systems as well. So this is our strategy. So where we are is, this is the Volvo Trucks targets. So, and I'll come to the regulatory targets in the next slide, but these are our targets as Volvo Trucks. These are our global targets. So you may not be aware Volvo Trucks is a global player. We're about present in about 119 countries globally. So we're looking for a CO2 reduction of 50% from our baseline of 2019 by 2030, to be 100% all our products to be completely renewable and CO2 reduced by 2040, and to be net zero by 2050. What we mean by that is to wash out the vehicle park in that 10-year period as well. So we're very conscious of what we've seen about electrification, but also some of these fuels, these exciting fuels we've talked about, and I'll touch a bit more on that in a moment. So again, as a manufacturer, we're the same as any other business. We're challenged with CO2 targets. So we have a target now, and again, it was updated. So as before the 14th of February this year, our CO2 target that was put into law by the European Union was it would be reduced by 30% from a 2019 baseline. That CO2 target for us as all manufacturers in the European market now has to be minus 45%. So that's a further 15% challenge that has been put to us. And if we don't meet them targets, we will get fined by every vehicle, and these fines are very large figures. They were talking thousands of euros per vehicle. And again, the challenge then goes to 65% by 2040 and 90% by 65% by 2035, and then 90% by 2040. But remember, our business target is to be 100% by that point. So we want to set our own challenges as well. If we don't do that, we don't get anywhere. So again, we also being not just from a regulatory point of view, but by our customers and our customers' customers. And I think it's important for people in the room that are in the business of transportation or in any other business that's business to business, is who is your customer's customer sometimes? Where are their CO2 targets? What are they being challenged on? And how does that filter down to you and your business? Because we're seeing that quite a few times now, is when, say, a contract is being up for renewal, that client or their client is coming to them and saying, we are being challenged by reducing CO2. How are you going to do that? How are you going to decarbonise this and defossilise your transportation? So there's probably a couple of names up there you can see. There's from around the locality at the top right and the bottom left, probably familiar brands for a few of you in the room. And again, these are some of the benefits as we see from electrification of powertrains. So most of them are probably, I hope, are probably quite obvious to most of you in the room. And again, we've gone through a driver shortage, and when you drive an electrified vehicle, it's a nice experience over a combustion engine vehicle. So, you know, it does attractive to some of the better drivers and that. But again, coming back to what I said earlier, it's all about business CO2 targets. These are targets that are being set to a regulatory level, and there's targets you've got to meet. It's like any financial accounting. And again, the customer's customer, how am I differentiating my business from everybody else? What gives me some leverage over the customer base? You know, can I demonstrate I am doing more to decarbonise my production process and my distribution? Again, we've seen some slides on the previous presentations about the journey we're on. And we're all on that journey together here. So we see this as where we're coming from internal combustion engines, with diesel being the main fuel. That, as we see that, this is a global slide. We see that regionally, there is a place for internal combustion. It is not going to go away. We are still developing our internal combustion engines. Anybody who's talking to our dealers at the moment about diesel vehicles will know that we're not sitting back and not developing them products. We're still having to make them more efficient to get the better delivery, to reduce that CO2. So it is hand in hand there. We are offering other alternatives with liquefied natural gas and biogases, but battery electric, that proportion is going to grow. We see that already in how many vehicles we're producing online already. Our production of battery electric vehicles is growing daily. It is getting bigger. We're producing more and more. And again, we're bringing in fuel cell electric vehicles as well. But again, at the moment is an electrified powertrain. I'll touch a little bit more of that towards the end of the presentation. Where this lands at 2040, we don't quite know ourselves where that share is going to be. There's a lot of things that we need to be looking at. It's about infrastructure, it's about charging infrastructure, it's about the regulatory environment, it is about cost, etc. So we don't know exactly where that's going to land, that share. But what we do know is the share of ICE will drop and the share of an electrified powertrain will increase. We do know that. We're seeing that trend already. And it's here already. We are selling trucks, like I say, already. North America is a big market for us. So that vehicle in the middle, the VNR, we're selling quite a lot of it, particularly in states like California. It's really gone further forward in their strategies on decarbonisation. The vehicles at either end, we've had them in production now since 2019 across Europe, and that share is growing. So this is what we call our medium duty range. So this range starts at 16 tonnes and goes up to 27 tonnes. So, and again, you may or may not know, but there are already vehicles in Dublin of this type running around already with certain operators. So these vehicles are already in amongst you and are working it and earning money. So I'm not going to go through too much of the details there, but again, some of the previous speakers were talking about energy consumption or energy storage. Obviously, these are commercial vehicles, these are heavier vehicles. Again, with the current regulations, as I understand it in your country here, you're permitted an extra 1 tonne on the GVW. So your standard 2-axle rigid, which is normally 18 tonnes, you're allowed to go to 19 tonnes. And your 3-axle rigids are 26 tonnes, you're allowed to go to 27 tonnes with a battery electric vehicle. Hence why we talk about 27 tonnes with this product. And again, we're talking normally, when we've discussed these products with most customers, we're talking about a battery capacity, and that's a gross power capacity of around about 265 to 280 kilowatts in the battery storage on these vehicles. The other thing is charging. I know it's already been discussed, but it is an important thing. I will go a little bit more into detail a little bit further on, but it's important that the discussion is about charging as much as the vehicle. It's one of them, again, we've been used to purchasing a vehicle today and not worrying too much about where we're going to refuel it. We'll either get a fuel card, we'll get a bunker card, or if it's a small operator, I'll just fill it up in the fuel station down the road. There's more thought does have to go into these, because what you don't want is for an electric vehicle to rock up and where do we charge it? It's a very expensive ornament if you're not careful. The key thing about these is it's not difficult technology. That's looking under the skin of the vehicle. So that modular power box is where the diesel engine would normally reside under the cab. That has 24-volt systems. It powers the power steering, the brakes, the air brakes, etc. Air compressors is all run under there. The traction batteries are down the side, and the traction motor is further down. And it's our own 2-speed motors. But the key thing there is, it's about 80% of the truck is still the same as the diesel. So if you park the two trucks side by side, they're not that significant. It's not outer space technology. So if you smash as these are distribution vehicles, you'll smash a headlamp lines, you'll break a mud wing or something like that. 80% of these parts are the same as the diesel. Depending on the job as well, you'll probably need a power takeoff. So we have that in hand as well. So we recognise that. So again, traditionally with an ICE engine, a diesel engine, we'd normally have, say, a constant drive off the back of the engine, or a clutchable system off the back of the gearbox. With this, we can still provide all that functionality. So again, I'll show you a couple of examples near the end of the presentation what that means. So that's the medium duty range. These are the heavy duty products. So again, the product on the left side of that image there, that will go to 44 tons. So it's up to the job. I'll just show you a quick video of what it can do, I hope. So I've been fortunate to drive a few of these trucks now at 40, 44 tonnes. Just to give you an example of the capability of these vehicles, normally a diesel truck of that type would probably start off on a flat road, would start off in third gear. Diesel start off in about sixth or seventh gear, to give you an idea of the torque capability. So, you know, they're definitely up to the job, you know, because you've got instant torque with an electric traction motor, remember. The other one is probably, again, was picked up, I think, with Sean, was the charging to 80%. So if DC charge, you can charge these pretty much from about 20% to 80% in an hour and a half, potentially, even though it's a 540 kilowatt capacity. So that gives you some idea of the capability of these vehicles. As you'd expect with a heavy-duty vehicle, we have a wider offering than the medium ones. And again, so you can see there, we're looking at 540 kilowatts. That's with 6 traction batteries installed on the chassis. Talked about the range, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail in a moment. And the other thing is, again, we can have, same with the medium duty, we can have AC charging or DC charging. If you're observant, you probably would have noticed on the medium duty, the AC charging was limited to 22 kilowatts. On these, it's up to 43 kilowatts. And on the medium duty, it was 150 kilowatts. On the heavy duty, up to 250. So again, but the key thing is, it makes the transition easier for you to consider when you can offer both AC charging capabilities and DC charging. And again, it is a Volvo driveline. So again, if you've driven Volvo trucks in diesel form, you know we build our whole driveline with the engine, gearbox, axles, etc. It is no different with this. So we've already put these are already in service. One of the first tractor units already in service in the UK is painted yellow. You probably may guess who that's for. So there's 4 of them already going into service into the UK. So we have these coming out in September as tractor units. And we've also got a number of rigids coming in again. My colleague in the room and I have already been in discussions, and we've got heavy-duty rigids already, people committing to run these vehicles in these configurations already. So that's what these look like. The other thing that people get concerned about is in urban environments, are these vehicles a danger? I could run, there's a little video about some of the sounds that these do, but what it means is really, you know, people are probably hard of hearing or anything like that. We have taken that into account, and in fact it is regulated for vehicles now. For vehicles, our vehicles are regulated to a regulation called Regulation 100. So as is all electric vehicles. So we have to do this anyway, but we go over and above that to keep them safe, everybody safe. So, energy management. Key question, how far will it go? Well, actually, electric is no different to diesel, gas, or anything like that. One of the key influences of how far it goes is how much energy it uses, is the driving style. If you have a driver that drives like they've stolen the vehicle, it's probably 20% less than normal. So one of the key influences, and again, one of the previous speakers spoke about speed. If you want to drive all the way up to the highest speed possible, your range will drop. Obviously, I think most people in the room are aware ambient temperature has an impact, and then other factors there as well. So we are aware of that, and I'll come on to that. One of the ones that people do forget about, though, is tyre selection and tyre alignment, tyre management. And that's, with these vehicles, it's not just the prime mover, it's your trailers as well. You need to be looking at maintenance on the whole combination. Again, the question is, will it complete the route? We have tools that will help you decide that. So again, we look at things like coordinates, postcodes, air codes, whatever. We're just introducing an app now where we can record the actual routes with a driver, subject to GDPR sign-off with the end users. We can look at where your payload changes, what the weight of the body's in, etc. Time, how long you're there. And we can also take into start times and traffic conditions as well. We look at information we have from our Volvo Connect services and superimpose them driver conditions through that route as well. And then what we have is this tool called electric range simulation. So what we're taking is all them factors we mentioned on the previous slide. We're also taking in, as we say, ambient temperature. So again, the average ambient temperature for the islands here is probably about 10 degrees Celsius. Probably a very cold day might drop to -5. The overall ambient for a very hot day, we know it's getting hotter, is probably about 20 to 25 degrees maximum. Trust me, between 20 and 25, there's not a lot of difference. But the batteries are taking that into account. That's why we have to regulate the temperature of the traction batteries. We take into account driver times as well. Obviously, the driver is regulated. They have to take statutory breaks, etc. So we have to take that into account as well. And then we look at both battery degradation. We know, as we've talked about, the more you cycle batteries, the longer the time is, the less you'll get out of that battery over time. So when the battery's at the beginning of life, potentially the range is longer than when it is, say, at year 8. But we take that into account in this simulation. And we also take in what gets recovered as well. If you remember in the video, all our products regenerate. So we try and get back any energy we can. We try and recover that and regenerate. So when we get these results like we see here, and again, this is a route we did for the vehicles that, again, for the vehicles that are operating in this locality as well. So to give us an idea that, are we safe? Is the customer safe? Is everybody happy that this investment that you put in is going to pay you back? So as a summary, this tells you about our medium duty, our heavy duties, where we're at with batteries, etc., and charging times. This is depleted to full. Remember, you really don't want to get below 20%. And once you get to 80%, that last 80 to 100% takes an age anyway. Most people probably know that. A battery takes a long time from 80% to fully charge. So if you can operate within that window, it's more efficient anyway. And what we also discuss with you is about the charging capabilities. We will build into the vehicle price, if you want, a charger to start with. But looking forward, you need to be looking where these vehicles are based. What is the civil plan for that site? Has it got the capability to take the energy draw onto that site? How many vehicles do you think are going to be based there? What do you feel that's the capability of that site? Who owns the site, of course, as well? And where do you think the demand planning is? Again, the conversation I had up in Scotland with an operator is they have high electric intensity during the day. So it was fortunate that they're looking that they can charge overnight when the demand during the day is low, so they can charge the vehicles overnight. The other way we've looked at it is how many vehicles are coming in at one time and how many are staying out if there's going to be more than one vehicle. So how many vehicles are on charge at one time? What is the draw? Because generally you don't have all your vehicles in at one time and need to be charging at the same time. So sometimes the challenge is not as much as what you think it is. And of course, as I've said, who owns the site, who's paying for it, who owns the asset, etc. You need to look at this with the purchase of the vehicle. So some people say some of these are hard to put into certain applications. Remember the power takeoff we talked about? These are vehicles out working. So these are concrete mixers. I was involved with these vehicles. There's 2 of these. This operator is probably committing now to another 3 heavy-duty electric vehicles as well. So again, they're working with their client to make the job work. People are talking about hydrogen, and we're aware of that. So we're already looking at fuel cell technology. There are challenges with hydrogen combustion engines, particularly with efficiency and ignition retardation times and things like that with combustion. So we're actually working on the fuel cell, so it's an electrified powertrain with hydrogen. Again, we're looking at the infrastructure and we're looking at with partners. So again, we, as Volvo Group, have teamed up with one of our competitors, would you believe, the Daimler Group, to create a business called Cellcentric. That business is actually headquartered in Germany. There's about 1,500 employees there already, trying to commercialise heavy-duty fuel cells already to use for that stage, as we see from 2025, 2027, to get that commercialisation going. What we are very conscious of is the competition for hydrogen, particularly green hydrogen, because hydrogen can be used is very attractive for a lot of commercial applications as well. So we are aware there may be a big fight for that hydrogen, and guess what? When there's a big fight for things, the price goes up. So people have to be aware of that. The challenges with this product, as there is with electrification, is making sure the legislation is placed to allow you to deploy it commercially. And again, I have to speak only from a UK perspective, because I come across from the UK. We've been working with our trade bodies, with the UK government Department for Transport, to explain to them some of the key challenges with the vehicle park, particularly with the trailer parks, because you can't go and change all your trailers overnight, or your bodies, about the masses and the dimension challenges. And it's not just the weight, it's with these vehicles there are challenges with the overall lengths as well. So we see that transition. We see electrification gathering pace. It will. There are challenges to do that. And again, remember what I said earlier about our customers, they're being challenged with reductions of CO2, which cascades down to that transport provider. So we definitely see that as our challenge. So, like I say, thank you very much.
Thank you, Duncan. That's very exciting to see the electrification of the heavy-duty sector. I think we've one more speaker online. Are we ready to go? Yep. So I'd just like to introduce Tomas from the Roscommon Leader Partnership.
Hi all. Apologies I can't be there. I actually have a stomach bug today, so I couldn't make the journey. I'm just going to give a quick overview of the fleet trial we were involved with SEAI. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm a volunteer with Roscommon County Development Fund. It's a company that basically is based in Roscommon, obviously. And I suppose our main objective is, just 1 second now. What we really look after is kind of the older people or people with disadvantages in Roscommon town. They just get this to share. So I suppose we are kind of also a loaning company where we loan out small bits of funds for projects that might be looking for match funds in order for grant aid. My day-to-day job is working with Roscommon Leader Partnership. We're a local development company. So we work really closely with the development fund, with community projects and enterprises that look for matching funds. So we're all about trying to help people, communities, and people that maybe just don't have the needs, the finances to I suppose get off the ground. And I suppose the profits then are reinvested back into the communities with really little or no interest. Getting on to what I'm really here to talk about is the trial in relation to the electric car. I suppose my comment is very much they are incredibly easy to drive, and there's something I didn't see myself driving 2 years ago, but I definitely will have one in the next 2 years. We were fortunate enough to get an ID4 just before Christmas on a 3-month trial. So to just give you an outline of what the car was used for, it was used for really bringing people to hospital appointments. Maybe it was bringing supervisors around the county to supervise participants that was doing the work on the ground in communities. And we already have a fleet of 8 vans. So it was just to see the trial would have worked in relation to the possibility of changing those vans. We'll say when we go to change those vans to see whether we'd go with electric or go back to the normal diesel. I drive a Audi, automatic Audi. That's my personal car. And from driving the Audi to the ID4, it's a huge difference in my eyes in relation to the diesel consumption, but also in relation to a lot of different things. It was, I suppose, from a personal point of view, the Audi is it's a Technic, so it would have a lot of the different features that a normal Audi wouldn't have, or a normal car. But this is a step up again in technology. I suppose from a farming point of view, I'm from a farming background, and I also drive a 3-litre Toyota Land Cruiser. If you look at the costs in relation to an ID4 and a Land Cruiser, there's very little difference. But for me to drive a Toyota Land Cruiser on a daily basis for my job, it will cost me 30 to 35 euro a day, which isn't sustainable. And now, luckily enough, there is SUVs coming on board in relation to 4x4s in relation to electric. So that's going to be a huge push forward. Just a few things in relation to, I suppose, my experience in relation to the trial. I'm someone that hadn't fully embraced electric cars until the company asked me to trial this. So I suppose the concerns I would have, and I know the last few speakers have alluded to this, is the time management. That is a huge issue in relation to rural Ireland. Last night I was planning my journey, so I was looking at Iron Road there, and in the past when I was attending conferences in Dublin, usually it would be the car, because the train services and bus services wouldn't be available, or you could be an hour waiting, depending on commutes and that. Now I'm starting to think, and the company is starting to think in relation to, I suppose, how we can actually be more economical and environmentally friendly with our travel. So, but last night when I was looking, I would have to travel to Athlone by car, get a train to Dublin Houston, get the Lewis to Connolly, get the Dart from Connolly to Lansdowne, and to walk to the RDS. I didn't mind that, but it was the time would have to take besides hopping into the car and going. Now, if I had the electric car, there's more concerns in relation to I would have to check the electric points. You all probably know this, but coming from a town in Roscommon town where there's very few electric points, that is an issue, and the accessibility to charging points is a huge issue. So you might be running, I suppose, a little bit later, low on battery, coming down to 20%, and you want to use the fast charge. I suppose the one thing is you have to check the accessibility around Roscommon Town to see are they being in use, because in the past, before we got this car, we wouldn't be passing any remarks on whether the charging points was actually there. So it triggered a whole different meaning for the company, and I suppose now there's 60 different people involved in thinking about how electric cars work. One thing, if there was an issue with the car, I called into local dealerships in relation to one little issue I had with the car, and they weren't fully up to speed in how to deal with say the likes of a charger. So I think we have a long way to go in relation to I suppose, the knowledge base, and it's the energy shows and what SEAI are doing is going to only just enhance that, and I would be all for that. The benefits, it is definitely a cheaper source of running costs. I suppose there is a huge benefit to the environment. I don't need to tell you all that. And it is a safer mode of transport. What I mean by that, I suppose, is the technology. I suppose, it was mentioned earlier in the speeches in relation to speed, and it makes you fully aware of your speed, because once you start to go to the speed limit, I won't say exceed the speed limit, go to the speed limit, there is a huge drop in relation to battery power. I just have a graph there in relation to, there is a charging point that I used frequently. You can see there that it was 4,767 kilometers. The total spend was 511, which when you're topping up on a fast charger, you are putting in the 30. It was limited to €30 at a time. That was getting me around 62%. The one huge thing with that is, I suppose, the €50 were obviously or the €30 was obviously adding up, which I wouldn't be aware of. In that time period, that was from the 25th of January until the 28th of February. So you're looking at a 1 month period. 1 month period, I was spending in around €500 in relation to electricity. What would I spend on I suppose between my two vehicles I would be spending probably 750 a month on the Jeep. And I suppose the one thing I would be looking at is, now I have to think about the journeys I'm doing, because that is colossal money when you look at that over a yearly period. In relation to I suppose, the car itself, and what I found from driving the electric cars, the shorter journeys was
Sean Callahan with SSE. Great presentation today, for example. Great to see the discussion going on and see people using them. For Douglas' benefit, I'm actually after coming from the Transport and Logistics Summit over in Dunleary. One of your FHs is outside, the FE is sat outside with a spare ramming on it, so it's great to see that there. Look forward to seeing circulation, of course, it's a nice one, isn't it? There we go. The question I have is, first for yourself, given hydrogen is so far away, and we've got, as outlined, such an ambitious target to decarbonise electrified transport, is it really just a distraction this decade? Is hydrogen a distraction, given it has no path to commerciality from now to 2030? The technology is not there, and I get that there are issues around infrastructure and EV, but at least we understand and know and can solve those issues. Whereas the issues around hydrogen are not so manageable this decade.
I can only say at the moment how we see it, or where I am within the business, our business now, our business will not be investing billions of euros into this business called centric. Obviously, payback, we see a customer base. We recognise there are certain vehicle applications, battery electric will have its limitations, where vehicles like have wheelbase, where we've got chassis space and that is challenging, where we see the technology of batteries probably may plateau, what we can get out of the range of batteries. We still see benefits from getting better and better batteries, but there probably will be a plateau after that. And where the range and the traction, what the better traction ability of vehicles are, we see certainly electric powertrain with hydrogen going through a fuel cell being effectively being a range extender. So, for example, there's no reason a battery electric heavy duty vehicle can't actually probably do about 500 kilometres in the future. But we feel that some people where they've got a very heavy load, where that range would be still not be able to achieve that, and to keep having to stop and having to recharge, it'd be a big problem for their business. We feel that things like range extending hydrogen fuel cell vehicles will have a place.
Are you at all concerned that today, for getting the EV transition underway today, that suggesting hydrogen is a possible option in 3 years' time might just stall the transition?
Again, I think it's what hopefully I said earlier. It's still about where we are today. There's challenges for both businesses that are having to report their CO2 or their customers saying what you're doing about CO2, and then the regulatory, what the governments are being challenged on as well. They're being challenged on their commitments to reduce CO2. So there's a lot of political drive, may I say, across the table here, to reduce CO2, and we feel battery electric has its technology is here and now. We will generally, most people, a bit of training, a bit of guidance can get their heads around it and use it and know where it stands commercially. So there is a lot of opportunities still we see to electrify with full battery electric for the next few years.
Thank you very much.
Have we any other questions?
Same gentleman as well. So you're talking about the rollout of your powertrains and charging infrastructure to different fleets, but over the next few years, there's I suppose a pattern around the industry to start providing grid services to the TSO or the TSO, and that is something, projects like that would be set up between, manufacturers like yourselves, owners of fleets, and different energy service providers with conjunction with the TSO and DSO themselves. Is that something that Volvo's been looking into? Is it something that your customers have expressed interest into? Is it something that your equipment can probably do for now and be ready for the future for that?
Yeah, we are obviously aware of that. There's probably aware there's this EU ambition, these green corridors across all the main routes across the EU, where, forgive me, I can't remember the maximum distance between between charging stations has to be on that, and I think there's a time frame on that. And so there's that. Plus, we have another collaboration between three major manufacturers in Europe, ourselves, Daimler, and Traton, to invest in I think it's about 1,000 charging stations within that network. So again, we see that if we don't facilitate the charging for certain operators, we can't get enough people interested to use it. So, as I said at the beginning, it's a little bit different to where we move with combustion technology, where people just go out and buy a vehicle and not particularly worry too much about carbon fuel. We see at the moment that in this transition, we have to facilitate both the charging and provide the vehicles as well.
And say, have you been looking into, say in particular in Ireland, ESB and Airgrid are providing policies for remuneration for, say, where you charge back to the grid, let's say, or provide grid services by instantaneously producing power, but that's something that might have a negative effect on the battery life itself. Is that something that you could look into?
Truthfully, I'm not sure where we would be with that at the moment. We are aware that batteries can be used as energy storage devices, because effectively that's what they are. So how they work in that sort of cycle is a bit of an interesting one. When you want to use it for traction with a motor vehicle, batteries being used for motor vehicle traction, that's when they have the hardest life. So we're obviously mindful of that deep cycling or rapid cycling. So we are aware of that. What we are doing is we have set live where we see like this, and again there is regulations coming in the Euro 7 regulations that will set requirements on the life of the batteries, depending on the weight category of the vehicle, how much distance they have to do in the first one, and how long they will be. So we're already aware of having to meet them requirements. But beyond that, we see the batteries of having much as second lives because they are big energy storage facilities. So we have set up a business called Volvo Energy, which will take them batteries outside from motor vehicle use and put them into energy storage. So we are aware that we're looking at already.
Yeah, there's a fund through the EU that you can get if you want to make that a project. There's a fund available right now, so you can get that for free. Just be aware of that. Thanks.
Thanks very much. And just like to add a small bit to the response as well on that. There are a number of research studies starting to emerge now that are actually showing regular bidirectional charging of EV batteries is actually extending the lifespan of the batteries rather than degrading. So that's just an interesting connect on that and chat to it a bit more.
I'm not sure if it's a question from Shane or from Kyle, just regarding the current population of BEVs of around 45,000 mentioned, and the target to be over 900,000. As far as I'm aware, typically here in Ireland we register approximately over 100,000 new vehicles every year, so that means every vehicle purchased between now and 2030 would be battery, unless there's a significant extension on the number of vehicles purchased. So I'm also conscious of BAK reducing in terms of the attractiveness for a battery vehicle. So do we expect that there will be any significant government intervention in terms of incentive schemes and ways to increase the attractiveness from that perspective for adoption?
Are you speaking on BAK incentive, is it? that's
Well,
all.
just in general, you know,
Yeah.
quite significant. It's a very ambitious target to get to that level.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, there'll have to be some sort of intervention to increase the switch over so that it improves. So I know it's increasing, but still.
Yeah. Like that target of 950,000 is actually fully electric and fully hybrid, and there's a midpoint target for 2025 that's Colin mentioned 195,000, which we're actually on track to hit at the moment. And there's at the moment about 77,000 EVs on the road. By EVs, I mean BEV and PHEV. So we are moving in the right direction, but there is a step change in 2025, so we are correct there, and that is what we're looking at to be the kind of mass adoption point within the country itself. Like, if you ask me, I would say there's extremely generous fleet incentives in place at the moment, and that I don't see there being any more financial incentives coming in the electric vehicle space. Because at the end of the day, there's a set pot of money, there's only so much you can do with it. And as the momentum, the numbers grow, that money has to stretch further and further to even the same pot of money, so it is a little bit more difficult. As you can see, Levy announced recently that the private car grant is actually being reduced to 3,500 instead of 5,000 from the 1st of July, and that pot of money is going to be redirected towards charging infrastructure. So the focus is now shifting from vehicles to infrastructure and making sure everybody is comfortable when they go looking to purchase an EV, that range anxiety has been removed because there's a charger every 50 or 60 kilometers on the main national road and motorways. We have chargers in every in most places. There's the share that sports scheme that was released there at the end of January, where sports clubs in Ireland can avail of funding through to get charge point into their premises as well. So we're actually tackling the local, regional and the national with regard to charging infrastructure, which is probably one of the largest barriers, some might say. So we remove that barrier, we start to see that momentum get even bigger, and we start to see that mass adoption, which will facilitate, I'd say, an attempt at reaching the 2030 target.
Just a question for Sean in relation to the EV car trial. Sean, I just wonder, I think you did say that you charge mostly at home, but when you use the public charge points, is there an interoperability arrangement between the charging companies such that whenever you turn up at a charger, you will always be able to charge, whether it be using a credit card or the app?
Yeah, it's a very good question. First of all, technically, obviously, CCS is a standard connection point. So in terms of plugging into the car, you can pull up with your Ionity charger, your USB charger, your Apple charger, anywhere else. And then financially, as you speak, or how you interact with that charger, it's got very easy in the new motorway service chargers. The Apple Green ones, you just use your debit card. Here with your debit card, of course. There's no downloading an app or no need to have an account or anything else. With ESB, I always use my card, and with Ionity, I had an app on my phone that I used. So, is there one app? Yes, I mean, Randbridge have one app now. What's the name of it? They call it Shane? Stop and Top. Yeah, Stop and Top. So the Stop and Top app is that you're thinking, obviously, as a fleet manager, you want to give one simple solution to your drivers. So DCI is a simple solution. As the fuel card, you can put into your Circle K, you can put into Maxol. For diesel, you can do the same with DCI electric car charger. With Stop and Top from Randbridge Technologies, you can do the same. But it's not as big an issue as you think, really, because everybody's got a company credit card, for example, they can use that app really easily. So it's moving that way, yes, is the answer. Good question.
Again, on company passenger cars being used by drivers, and forgive me if there's an obvious answer to this that I have to say. Charging at home is the obvious solution. What is the compensation to drivers who now have a cost from their home electricity that previously had a fuel card, and how we can around the issue of them having a cost for installing the charger in the first place? Are companies paying for the installation of the chargers, and how do they claw back the cost of the electricity?
Yeah, like that. So for the home charger, you actually don't need a vehicle anymore to get a home charger grant from SEAI. So any one of your employees can apply for a €600 grant towards the cost and installation of that charge point. The remainder, whether the company wants to pay for it themselves or going to make their employee pay for it, that is directly between their relationship ownership there. The cost of the electricity as well to fuel it, it is a difficult one because you have to ascertain what consumption is used for personal travel and what's used for business travel. Now there is back office management systems and smart systems that can be built into home chargers that you can say, well, use it Monday to Friday, it can give you times, it can give you the energy that's consumed. You will have apps that can track vehicles as well and say, well, where did you go, what were you doing, and that type of thing. So even a man, you may have a smart car, smart charger, and you can find solutions for any business out there, what they're trying to do, what setting they will look to win. And if you visit down the EV hall today, there's a number of charge providers there and vehicle guys will be able to chat you through different solutions and what will actually work best for your unique scenario.
Shane, if I could just add to that, I know LeasePlan have a system, some of you are probably using LeasePlan for your fleet, whereby they have tags and queuing, and there is a receiver on their home charger, and they tap for that electricity that is used for that particular charge, billed directly to the company. It doesn't appear on your domestic bill at all. That's very handy because domestic bills, obviously, we noticed it at home, it does get significantly bigger when you're substituting the spend you have on diesel for electricity. We pay for the diesel every day or at the end of the month, their BCI account, but then 2 months later, you've got a heart attack and go to the envelope. So yeah, that lease plan system is very, very important. Actually, it takes that cash flow situation away from the driver.
Because in our SEC electricity, just wondering, I'm not sure what these questions are actually about, but I have a query on your thoughts on the capability of creating corporate EV charging, considering the outcome that ESB recommendations given on constraints and grid for coming years into up to 2030 and beyond. So it's not, I suppose, a regional level. We would be adding home chargers and wires related up to a certain capacity and large number of upgrades in the heat. I'm just wondering, is that a limiting factor for device, and it has to be announced some discussions around how that can be accelerated?
Yeah, look, that is a very good question. I think everybody in the country, the million by 2030 get a home charger, we all plug in at the same time. What's going to happen to the grid? Except that it's tremendous heat and all things that are trucking out. So there is a validity question. I would say it depends on where you look at it. What is going to be important between now and the mass adoption point I've spoken about is how we address EVs, EV charging, and the smart systems that operate in between that link your charger to your home, to your car, to the grid itself. So we're kind of looking at getting into the realm of what was mentioned as the bi-directional chargers, your V2G. So what you can actually do through using programs like the Smart Metering program is actually provide smart tariffs, where you're actually incentivizing the home user, the home consumer, not to plug in when you think peak demand is going to be there, but actually plug in at 2 a.m. or to have your charger set to come on at 3 a.m. or whatever it might be, when the wind is blowing, when normally we might be looking at curtailment, renewable sources of energy at that time. We can now use that energy to power the cars. But what you also need to think of, if you have a million EVs plugged into the grid, there are a million battery storage devices as well. So if they're enabled and activated, you can actually reinforce your grid without actually making any infrastructure upgrades on it as well. So I hope I've got some way to answer your question. I'd be happy to take up with you later as well.
Just add a tiny bit to that. That is very interesting what Shane just said about you've charged your cars. We all charge our cars at night when the wind was blowing anyway, and there was no use for the electricity that was being generated, particularly the offshore wind farms that are going to come on board. And then in the morning, we will be able to power our toasters and our kettles from the cars. So we're going to actually save the pressure that's on the grid. There's no pressure on the grid at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Think about it, the same amount of electricity is being generated by the wind farms, but there is no need for it. Industry isn't working. There's a lot less draw of electricity during the night. So we save it up during the night, keep it in our cars, and in the morning, we will probably use that nighttime wind that blew 6 hours earlier for our breakfasts. So it's actually going to help the grid. It's my firm belief on it, that timing it is going to mean we'll help the grid. We'll draw electricity when it's not needed, and we'll give electricity to the grid effectively into our homes when it is needed at peak time in the morning.
Thanks, Sean. So we've gone over time, so we might just one final question.
Wrong person for the final question. Just a very quick couple of observations on things that have been said. With regard to the commercial vehicles contributing to the grid, that's something SSE are doing at plus 10 at present, so that is known to work and work well. With regard to benefit in kind, huge issue in Ireland, and most of the value here comes down to the administration, not to the actual values. That might be easy gains if we were to look at reducing the administrative burden for fleet operators where the cars or the vehicles can be used in private roads. That the value here, that's the big problem. It's not the price. So the questions I had then were related to the distance between the need to reduce transport emissions by 50%, the maximum achieving about 30% of the national fleet into EV over the period, because we've 2.8 million vehicles in, we're expecting to get 1 million. Your two plug-in hybrids, I'm going to be optimistic and say plug-in hybrids will go away and 30% will be electric. Still leaves us with 20%. So that 20% then we're looking at what?
Yeah, so you're looking at just purely EVs reaching the target in 2030.
No, sorry, the point I'm making is the target we have to reduce transport related emissions by 50% by 2030. The way I'm doing it in very simple terms is taking 30% of that as being transitioned to EV, because we're replacing a third of the fleet with ostensibly electric vehicles. So where are we getting the other 20% from?
Yeah, it's a combination of a number of different factors. I think that as Carl alluded to earlier, we're looking at renewable fuels, such as increasing the blends that we can use with our biodiesels and bioethanol. There is moving towards sustainable and active travel, where we're actually trying to reduce car journeys, reduce the journeys that are taken, so there's no emissions coming from that. It's actually healthier as well, which is a nice byproduct of it. There is looking at utilisation of the assets that are there, which is similar to reducing private car journeys, but it's more on the commercial side. Are you optimising the asset, sweating your asset correctly, or are you doing 9 trips when you do 8? Are you going unloaded at some stage when you could be taking in a small deviation and coming back and utilising another load back to your depot as well? So there is a number of options down that side as well. Essentially, it's electrification, reducing the need to travel, and optimising what is already in place there. Rail as well, of course. Public transport as well. That's what I meant optimising everything that's already in place. You see, if you're double metro, you have our bus coming, and see what else will happen with rail as well. And if you look at London, we've electrified the bus corridors, bus that there as well. Yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate your time today, and if anyone wants to